Hey guys, tonight we're easing into something a little hazy, a little wild, and very, very old. You're barefoot in soft dirt, wandering through a vineyard that smells like ripening grapes and warm dust. The air is thick with bees. The occasional hum of a lyre drifts over a hillside, and your hands are stained purple, though you're not quite sure why. This is no ordinary night. Above you, a constellation pulses just slightly offbeat, like it's had one too many. And somewhere behind a curtain of olive trees, a god is being born in the weirdest possible way. You're not hallucinating. Probably. Tonight, we're following the story of Dionysus, the ancient Greek god of wine ecstasy, and politely blurring reality until it forgets to check your ID. It's a tale of resurrection rebellion and questionable parenting. You'll travel through moonlit groves, drunken debates, and cultish midnight parades. By the end, you might even understand why humans still pour a drink to celebrate or mourn just about anything. Oh, and one note, you probably won't survive this if you try to keep up with an actual Dionysian festival. Trust me, mortals historically didn't do great in those. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing how far this little storytelling train wanders. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the edge of a myth, the birth of Dionysus. And not just any birth. No warm towels or swaddling cloths here. This is divine messiness at its finest. It begins with a mortal woman, Semele, who makes the unfortunate mistake of dating Zeus. Classic error. She's smart, beautiful, and not at all prepared for the passive-aggressive wrath of Hera, Zeus's long-suffering goddess wife. You're in Thebes now, surrounded by flickering torchlight and gossiping priestesses. Semele is pregnant, and everyone's doing their best not to make eye contact, because something's off. Semele claims her baby daddy is Zeus himself. And worse, she's been bragging about it. Big no-no in the Greek god dating scene. Hera, never one to let these things slide, appears to Semele in disguise and slyly suggests, hey, if he's really Zeus, shouldn't he be able to show you his true form? Spoiler, he can, but he really shouldn't. Zeus arrives in full god mode, lightning, thunder, everything, and Semele is vaporized instantly. Historians still argue whether this was poetic justice, a tragic misunderstanding, or just another Thursday in the Olympian dating pool. But wait, the fetus survives. Somehow. In a panic or a stroke of divine improvisation, Zeus scoops the half-formed Dionysus from the ashes and sews him into his thigh. Yes, his thigh. That's where the baby finishes baking. You're there when it happens. You can smell burnt cedar and see the fates exchanging uncomfortable glances. Zeus limps for months, and you can only imagine the godly doctor bills. But eventually, Dionysus is born again, this time from the leg of a thunder-wielding immortal. So congratulations, you've just witnessed the world's most confusing birth. Twice. You carry the newborn Dionysus in your arms. He's surprisingly heavy for someone with no torso for the first part of his life. Zeus, knowing this child will never be safe on Olympus, with Hera lurking around, sends him far away, hidden among mortals, and nurtured by forest spirits. Enter the nymphs of Mount Nysa, an impossibly dreamy, probably fictional location where the trees hum lullabies and time forgets to pass properly. You help hang tiny garlands in Dionysus's cradle, weaving ivy and grape leaves like it's the first mobile ever made. Bees bring honey. Leopards nap in the sun nearby. The nymphs raise Dionysus with a kind of wild love. He doesn't grow up in marble palaces, but in tangled forests and echoing caves. No rigid rules, no Olympian politics. Just music, wine, and an unsettling number of talking animals. But even in paradise, things start to go weird. The baby has tendencies. For instance, you're not sure how he keeps turning juice into wine. At first, it's cute. Then the goats start acting tipsy, and a tree begins quoting Homer in Latin, which hasn't even been invented yet. Clearly, something supernatural is fermenting. Some myths say Dionysus wandered even as a child, disguised, reborn, exiled again and again. Egypt, Syria, India. Like a toddler on a year-abroad trip, he collects hats, cults, and accents. Historians still argue whether these travels represent real trade routes or just Greek authors getting drunk and flexing their geography muscles. As you grow alongside Dionysus, you notice something unique. Unlike the other gods, he doesn't judge mortals from a distance. He joins them, dances with them, slurs his words next to them. He's not above mortals, he's right there in the wine-soaked trenches with them. And it's revolutionary. While most gods demand order and temples and sacrifices, Dionysus brings a different gospel surrender. Not to violence or dogma, but to feeling, to music, to forgetting your taxes for a night. One quirky tidbit. There's a rumor whispered by the wind through Mount Nysa that Dionysus once turned pirates into dolphins just for kidnapping him. Not out of vengeance, but because he liked dolphins. It's that kind of chaos. As you lie back beneath a cypress tree, the stars spin gently overhead. You feel it, don't you? The beginnings of something ancient and intoxicating, a god not of dominion, but delirium. And for the first time in human history, the party's just getting started. You wake to the sound of goats bleating in the distance and a reed flute somewhere to your left. Dionysus is older now, not quite a man, not quite a god, but very clearly not normal. You've grown used to his presence, the way the air hums around him, the way the forest leans in just a little when he laughs. He's moved on from babbling grape juice into wine. Now he does it on purpose. You watch him gently press crushed fruit between his palms, let the juice run through his fingers, and murmur a few words you don't recognize. By sunset, it's fermenting, bubbling happily in old clay jars as if it too wants to dance. His foster parents, the nymphs, the satyrs, the occasional wandering philosopher with suspiciously nice sandals have started worrying. Wine makes people act strange. Sometimes beautifully strange. Sometimes not so much. There's giggling, sure. But also shouting, stripping, spontaneous poetry, and more than a few accidental fires. Dionysus, ever the people's god, finds this delightful. You follow him into nearby villages disguised in simple robes and a hood. He smiles, easily plays music for children, helps widows carry water, and slips a little of his magic into every communal drink. At first, villagers are thrilled. The grapes are richer this year. The festivals last longer. The marriage is surprisingly more passionate. But then come the doubters. Always the doubters. In one particularly vivid memory, you walk beside him into a bustling town square. A local priest scoffs at his name, calls him a fraud, and demands proof of his divinity. Dionysus nods politely, says nothing. That night, the river floods, but only upstream, and the priest wakes up with a crown of ivy growing from his pillow. The townsfolk call it a miracle. The priest calls it witchcraft. Tomato, tomato. You're starting to notice a pattern wherever Dionysus goes. Order unravels. Gently, gleefully, sometimes catastrophically, but always with rhythm. One day a group of pirates, real ones, not the fun musical kind, spots Dionysus lounging on the shore. Young, beautiful, and clearly well-fed. They assume he's a prince. Easy ransom. You try to stop them, but he waves you off. The pirates drag him aboard. You hide nearby helpless. But Dionysus doesn't panic, doesn't beg, just smiles. And then things get strange. First, the ship refuses to move despite full sail. Then ivy begins crawling up the mast. Slowly at first, then, like it's chasing something. The deck groans under the weight of grapes. A flute plays itself from the rigging. And in the center of it all, Dionysus sits calmly on a barrel sipping wine from a cup that absolutely wasn't there a second ago. The pirates scream. They leap overboard, flailing and cursing, but instead of sinking, they twist skin, rippling bones, reshaping until they're dolphins circling the ship in wide-eyed confusion. Dionysus raises his cup in toast. You swear one of the dolphins blushes. Historians still argue whether this tale is metaphor or warning. You're pretty sure it's both. Over time, Dionysus starts attracting followers. Not just drunkards or thrill-seekers, but people on the margins. Women, foreigners, the broken, the bruised, the too loud and too different. They find something in him the other gods never offered: joy without permission, laughter without consequence. His inner circle becomes a whirlwind of color and sound. There's Ampelos, the beautiful youth who teaches Dionysus how to ride a bull before being tragically gored by one. Heartbroken Dionysus turns the boy into a grapevine, his first deep loss immortalized in fermentation. There's Silenus, his tutor/drinking buddy, always half asleep and half soused, spouting riddles that are either nonsense or profound cosmic truths. Sometimes both. Silenus once told you that the best thing for a human is never to be born, the second best to die early. You didn't sleep well after that. Then there's the Maenads, his wild women. They wear fawn-skin cloaks and carry thirsty long sticks tipped with pine cones. They dance through the woods, eyes blazing, chanting his name until language fails them. You've seen them tear a tree apart with their bare hands. You've seen them cradle a bird's nest like it held their future. Their madness is sacred, their devotion terrifying. And Dionysus loves them dearly, but not everyone is pleased. You start noticing whispers among the city leaders, philosophers, and high priests. He's corrupting the women, they say, turning slaves into prophets, making the poor forget their place. You'd argue, but they're not entirely wrong. You sit beside Dionysus one evening, the two of you staring at a fire. He sighs long and low and says, "They want me to be a god of grain, of boundaries, of contracts, but that's not what this world needs." You ask him what it does need. He doesn't answer, just pours you another cup. One fringe tidbit you overheard once. There's a theory floating among mystery cults that Dionysus is actually older than Zeus, that he's not the son, but the father, reborn and reborn and reborn again. A loop of ecstatic birth and death, a cosmic party that never ends. You asked Dionysus about it once. He laughed so hard he spilled his wine on a passing hedgehog. But the more time you spend near him, the more you feel it too, that pulsing undercurrent in everything. The heartbeat in grapes, the wild in your chest, the part of you that wants to laugh and cry at the same time for no reason. That maybe is his truest miracle. And in those moments, you don't care what the high priests say. You just keep dancing. The sun is high and hot, the kind of heat that sticks to your skin and makes even the olives seem annoyed. You're trekking behind Dionysus again, his robe slung casually over one shoulder, his hair tangled with ivy, and his eyes glittering with plans. Today, you're headed toward a village nestled deep in a valley. But you're not here to preach or conquer or bless anything. You're here to ferment. This is the day you see wine, truly made for the first time. You've heard whispers about it, of course. Seen crushed grapes staining fingers caught the sharp, sweet scent in clay pots buried beneath the earth. But this is different. This is deliberate. The villagers greet Dionysus with suspicion. You can't blame them. A strange man with no visible baggage but a troupe of barefoot dancers and one extremely overconfident donkey doesn't exactly scream helpful visitor. Still, they let him speak, mostly because he's charming, partly because he offers them free drinks. He gathers the town around a worn stone basin. The grapes, deep purple and firm, have been hanging heavy on the vines for weeks. Dionysus plucks one and rolls it between his fingers. Everything you need, he says, is already inside. You watch as the fruit is crushed slowly, rhythmically, bare feet pressing down with a dance-like patience. Juice flows and the smell begins to change, from sweetness to something older, deeper, the kind of smell that belongs more to caves than kitchens. Then come the vats, the clay jars, the covered pits that breathe with unseen life. Fermentation isn't beautiful at first, it's bubbling, hissing, unglamorous magic. But the villagers begin to gather close curiosity, overcoming fear. Dionysus tells them what to expect. The taste will change. The texture will change. The people drinking it will change too. You don't fully understand it then, but this is the birth of something monumental. Not just wine, not just alcohol. Culture. Historians still argue whether the Greeks invented wine themselves or borrowed it from older civilizations, Egypt, Phoenicia, maybe even Georgia. But here now it feels like something primordial, like the earth is remembering something through the juice. Later that night you share the first cups beneath the stars. The village is glowing, no torches needed. Faces flushed, voices loud, but not angry. Stories being told that were never told before. Someone starts singing off-key and doesn't stop, and no one asks them to. You're lying in the grass, listening to the rhythmic clink of emptying cups when Dionysus leans over and whispers, "This is what they're afraid of." You blink. Who? Everyone who lives by rules. His voice is soft, almost lost in the night. Because when people remember joy, they question control. The next day the elders try to take back the wine. Too strong, they say. Too much laughter. It's distracting our youth. So Dionysus leaves. But not before planting a vine along their fence line. Quietly. No ceremony. Just a tendril that twines up the wood and waves to you as you walk away. Weeks later you hear that the village tried to burn the vine. It grew back stronger. The children now sneak fermented juice in hollowed-out gourds. The elders pretend not to notice. And the vine's still waving, One quirky tale you overhear on the road: in one town, a donkey got drunk and invented a new dance. The villagers named it after him and still perform it every harvest. You ask Dionysus if it's true. He just grins and says, "That donkey had rhythm." As you travel, you begin to see the pattern. Wherever Dionysus goes, fermentation follows. Wine is more than a drink. It becomes a symbol of freedom, of pleasure, of letting go. But it's not just about the buzz. There's structure to it. Rhythm, even reverence. Dionysus begins whispering new rituals. Not like the stiff ceremonies you remember from temples. These are earthy, sensual, sometimes chaotic, yes, but also deeply human. You're there when he teaches his first real followers. He speaks of duality, pain and joy, birth and death, madness and clarity. The vine dies, he says, so the wine can live. So must we. It sounds poetic. It also sounds like something you might hear from someone halfway through their third cup. And yet, it resonates. People start calling him the twice-born. First from Semele, then from Zeus's thigh. And in a way the wine is twice born too, first as grape, then as spirit. You catch the metaphor just before it slips away like a tipsy thought. But it's not all dancing and drunken goats. One village refuses Dionysus entirely, calls him a charlatan, threatens his followers. You watch from the tree line as Dionysus turns their well water into wine. The people panic, try to pour it out, but every jug they fetch turns red again. One man drinks and starts reciting ancient prophecies in a forgotten tongue. They build a shrine the next day. You're learning that Dionysus doesn't demand worship like other gods. He invites it, he seduces it, and if you refuse, well, your livestock might learn to sing. Historians still debate whether Dionysian rituals were truly religious or just an excuse to get very, very lit. But for the people participating, the line doesn't seem to matter. Their eyes glow with something more than intoxication, something close to revelation. You fall asleep that night on a bed of hay, the stars wobbling gently above you. The air smells like crushed fruit, wood smoke, and possibility. Somewhere nearby, a group of Dionysians is still dancing. You think you hear someone shout your name. Or maybe it's just the wine. Either way, you dream of vines curling through stone and laughter echoing down a mountainside. You wake to silence. Not peace silence. That strange kind of stillness that makes your skin prickle as if the air itself is holding its breath. Dionysus isn't nearby, not this time. You're in a village square again, one you visited weeks ago. No vines creeping up the buildings. No flute music wafting from behind tavern doors. Just flat earth, tight lips, and eyes that look through you instead of at you. The local magistrate has declared Dionysian rites nonsense. No more wine rituals, no more twilight dances in the fields. The people are told to return to normal, whatever that means. You see them trying, hauling grain, mending nets, scrubbing stone with the kind of zeal that only surfaces when fear lingers nearby. But the vines haven't gotten the message. You spot one curling through a crack in the council hall, another threading its way up a lamp post. Quietly, stubbornly, the earth refuses to forget. Soon enough, Dionysus returns, not in triumph, not with music or thundering miracles. He arrives disguised again, this time as a traveling bard with dust on his robe and a broken lyre slung over his back. You walk beside him unnoticed. He doesn't smile. He doesn't have to. Within hours, people start talking. quietly behind closed shutters. They remember how laughter used to echo between buildings, how their dreams had once smelled like grapes and firelight. They whisper these things to one another like secrets, like prayers, but the magistrate hears, and like all men whose power is built on fear, he overreacts. A proclamation is issued. Anyone caught practicing Dionysian worship will be exiled or worse. You're there when they burn the first offering, a bundle of ivy, a pine cone staff, and a carved mask tossed into the flames by soldiers who don't understand what any of it means. Dionysus watches from the shadows, eyes glittering with something deeper than anger. Disappointment, maybe, or pity. That night he dreams loudly. You can't explain it any other way. His sleep spills out into the village. Animals howl. Vats of grain sour overnight. Every well turns just a little purple. And then the madness begins. It starts with a group of women, ordinary townsfolk by day. Something cracks open in them under the weight of repression. You see them in the early hours running barefoot into the forest, singing songs in no known language. Their laughter rises like smoke. The town wakes in confusion. Husbands and sons go looking. They find the women hours later, eyes alight, dancing with snakes coiled around their arms. One of them claims she can hear the stars humming. Another refuses to come home until the moon speaks to her directly. This is your first glimpse of divine madness, or mania, as later poets would call it. Not rage, not illness. Something more elemental. The breaking of chains you didn't know you were wearing. Historians still argue whether Dionysian madness was real ecstasy or clever theatrics. Whether the wine caused the rapture or the rapture caused the wine. But you see it in the Maenads' faces, something sacred, unfiltered, and terrifyingly free. One woman, middle-aged eyes kind, tells you she's never felt so alive. Then she turns, plucks a frog from the stream, kisses it gently, and places it on her shoulder like a brooch. He understands, she says. You don't question it. Meanwhile, the magistrate panics. He sends guards into the woods. Bad idea. You try to warn him, but no one listens to barefoot wanderers with wine breath and starry eyes. The next morning, 2 of his best men return, covered in mud, speaking in riddles and swearing they saw a panther playing a harp. One of them has grown antlers, just little ones. Whispers of divine punishment circulate fast. Townsfolk sneak into the woods at dusk, hoping to glimpse a god. They come back changed, some more peaceful, some weirder. Dionysus says nothing. He simply walks among them unrecognized, humming old songs. Occasionally he helps a child find their mother. Occasionally he vanishes mid-sentence. You once find him teaching a group of women how to twist ivy into headbands. He's patient, gentle, laughs when they get it wrong. But when one of them asks if he's the Dionysus, he only winks and replies, "Depends how much you've had to drink." You're there when the magistrate finally snaps. He tries to arrest the Maenads, sends a full company after them, armed and armored. This time, you don't follow. You stay with Dionysus, sitting beneath an olive tree, sipping something that tastes vaguely of cinnamon and prophecy. When the soldiers don't return, the town enters full collapse. Crops rot overnight. Wine jars overflow. One man begins speaking fluent Egyptian despite never leaving the village. No one questions Dionysus now, but he doesn't gloat, doesn't demand tribute or temples. Instead, he gathers the Maenads and speaks in soft tones. tells them it's time to move on. That madness, while holy, must not become cruelty. That freedom should not eat itself. They nod, cry, hug one another, and then one by one they fade into the woods. You walk beside him, your feet blistered but your heart warm. Will they be okay, you ask. He shrugs. Better than before. One fringe myth says that those who followed Dionysus too closely vanished into the stars, transformed into constellations no one's named yet. Another says they simply settled new towns and taught others how to feel again. You don't know which is true. Maybe both. What you do know is this repression can't stop joy forever. And madness, when shared carefully, can feel a lot like truth. You leave that town quieter than you arrived. But something's blooming behind you. Something the magistrate will never be able to name, let alone uproot. You're walking under moonlight now, barefoot, always barefoot, with pine needles clinging to your soles and the whisper of drums somewhere in the dark. The forest is alive. Not with animals or wind, but with intent. You feel it under your skin, prickling along your arms. Dionysus is near. You're not alone anymore. All around you, women drift between trees like shadows wrapped in animal skins, their eyes glowing with something older than reason. These are the Maenads, and you've finally arrived at one of their secret rites. There's no temple, no altar, just a clearing lit by fire and starlight pulsing with rhythm. You hesitate at the edge, unsure if you're supposed to be here. One of them sees you tall, sharp-eyed, wearing a wreath of ivy and an expression that says she hasn't slept in days, and she nods. You're in. The Maenads don't worship Dionysus with sermons or scripture. They become worship. Their bodies are the offering, their laughter the hymn. They chant in broken syllables, dance in unison, and then apart swirl like smoke until you're not sure where one ends and the next begins. No one leads, yet everyone follows. The thyrsus staffs, you know, those long sticks with pine cones on top, beat the earth in time with the music. It's mesmerizing. You try to count the rhythm, but it changes just as you think you've caught it. This isn't chaos, it's precision in disguise. Historians still argue whether the monadic rites were orgies, hallucinations, feminist revolutions, or just very intense camping trips. What you see feels sacred, messy, sure, but sacred. Women who've been ignored, controlled, laughed at, are now spinning like comets. They don't just worship Dionysus, they channel him. You spot one Maenad with blood on her hands, holding what looks like a deer's leg. Her expression is soft, calm, almost maternal. Another is whispering to a frog as if receiving instructions from beyond. You glance around, slightly alarmed. Then you see Dionysus. He's sitting cross-legged near the fire, watching the scene, with an expression that's not joy or power, but something in between approval. He catches your eye and raises a cup but doesn't speak. You get the sense that this ritual isn't for him. It's for them, his followers, his revelers, his dancers in the dark. And for the first time, you realize something important. Dionysus isn't a god who demands worship. He makes it irresistible. You sit beside the fire, and slowly the rite pulls you in. A Maenad offers you a drink. It tastes like cinnamon and smoke. Another hands you a mask, wooden smiling, cracked along one edge. You put it on. The world shifts. Trees sway with more purpose. The stars blink in rhythm. Your heartbeat joins the drumming. You dance. You don't remember when it starts or how long it lasts. Could be minutes. Could be hours. You lose yourself in the music, in the movement, in the collective hum of feet and breath and echo. Later, you collapse beside a root, dizzy and giddy. Dionysus appears, hands you water, and says, "You held back." You blink at him. "Was I supposed to let go?" He leans in. Not supposed, invited. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howls. Or maybe it's a woman, or both. You think about how societies teach discipline, order, clean hands and tidy thoughts. And then you look at the maenads painting their faces with ash and laughing like they invented the moon. One fringe tale, you remember, some claimed the maenads could tear animals limb from limb during their ecstasies, ripping apart bulls with their bare hands. But the maenads you're with now, cradle birds, stroke tree bark, weep for crushed berries. Their ferocity is spiritual, not violent. Their madness. Chosen. You ask Dionysus if the old stories are true. He shrugs. What's truth if it keeps people away from the fire? There's a quiet moment then. The music slows. The dancers begin to rest, laying their heads on moss or curled beside tree trunks. Dionysus stands, and without a word, the fire dims, not extinguished, just sleepy. He walks off into the trees, and the maenads follow. Not in formation, not like an army, but like a tide. You don't know where they're going, but you know you're going with them. As you move through the forest, the rites linger behind you like perfume, wild, sweet, and just a little dangerous. You think about the towns that fear these women, about the men who mock them or call them mad. You think about how terrifying freedom can look to someone who's never tasted it. You pass a clearing where someone's carved a mask into a tree. It smiles at you, not warmly, not cruelly, just knowingly, and you smile back. This is the cult of Dionysus, not of control, but release, of unmaking and remaking, a place where your name doesn't matter, only your willingness to dance. And tonight you danced. You're sitting now, legs sore, head still buzzing from the forest's thrum on a cold stone bench beneath an open sky. A strange hush hangs in the air. The trees are gone. The vines have been trimmed. You're in a city, Athens. The Parthenon looms to your right, half-complete, noble and unfinished, like someone mid-thought. Marble columns line every walkway, and the sound of sandals slapping stone echoes faintly, punctuated by the chirp of arguments in corners, and the lazy chatter of old men who know too much and say too little. But this city, disciplined, cerebral, proud, is strangely obsessed with Dionysus. You're here for a festival. Not just any festival. The city Dionysia, where the god of wine and madness is honored by theater. You blink at the irony. Dionysus, who prefers forests to forums, is now the patron of scripts, stages, and organized applause. You watch the stage being built, wooden planks laid over dirt, backdrops painted with crude mountains and more than suggestive wine jugs. At night, men rehearse lines by lamplight, their faces hidden behind exaggerated masks, one smiling, one weeping, the comedy and the tragedy, both his. The entire city prepares. It's a big deal. Plays are commissioned poets, funded actors, selected from among citizens. Even the generals attend not to bark orders, but to cry at catharsis. It's as if, for a few days, everyone agrees to admit they have feelings. You find Dionysus's statue tucked near the amphitheater stone, serene, with that familiar smirk that always seems just shy of laughter. At his feet, offerings pile up grapes, goblets, and tiny clay phalluses. You pretend not to stare at those. Historians still argue whether the connection between Dionysus and theater was spiritual or political. Some claim it was about channeling emotion safely containing madness in story. Others say it was simply good business plays, brought crowds, and crowds brought wine sales. But standing there, you feel it. The tension between structure and wildness, reason and frenzy. Theater becomes a sacred middle ground, a safe chaos, a sanctioned moment where the city lets itself unravel, just a little before tightening back up. You sit in the audience on opening day, wrapped in a borrowed cloak sandwiched between two boisterous olive merchants. The crowd buzzes with anticipation. The first actor steps forward, his mask oversized, his voice carrying over the hills. The play, a tragedy. Of course, a king forgets humility, a queen forgets herself. The gods remind them both, usually with snakes. At first you try to follow the plot, but something else catches your attention, the reactions. A stoic soldier quietly weeping, a mother gasping, a young boy scribbling notes for a poem he'll never show anyone. The stories on stage are ancient, but the emotions brand new. Every time you glance at Dionysus's statue again, he seems pleased. One quirky tidbit you overhear from a particularly animated old man. Some believe the original plays weren't about myth at all, but about ritual. That the stage was once an altar, and actors were possessed, not performing. That tragedy was once trance. You ask if he's sure. He asks if you want another drink. You do. Later that evening, the comedies begin. Masked men make bawdy jokes, animals speak in falsetto, and politicians are openly mocked by name. The crowd loves it. You laugh so hard your ribs hurt, and yet beneath the silliness there's truth, sharp, bitter truth that no one would dare say outside these stone seats. You think back to the Maenads in the woods, their frenzied liberation, their unfiltered joy, and now this controlled madness, manicured mayhem. The same God. Two forms, and you realize something. Dionysus doesn't care how you let go, only that you do. Some let go with dancing, others with poetry, others still with jokes about donkeys and overly ambitious philosophers. One actor stumbles mid-line and improvs a limerick about his mother-in-law's wine. The crowd howls. Dionysus, somewhere in the crowd in a borrowed tunic and wine-stained sandals, probably howls too. But even here, amid scripts and masks and sponsors, you can feel the god's core message, feel. Risk absurdity. Tell the truth even if you have to disguise it in fiction. You remember something Silenus once said back when he was still mostly sober. The line between divine madness and human reason is thinner than a grape skin. You didn't understand it then. Now under the Athenian stars you do. As the festival draws to a close, winners are announced. Prizes are given, scripts are rolled up, masks packed away. The city exhales and returns to law and ledger. But something lingers. A glint in the eyes of the poets. A new gesture in the chorus girls. A softness in the shoulders of the man who yesterday screamed at a shopkeeper for misweighing olives. You smile. You think about how Athens, for all its rules and laws and ballots, still bows to Dionysus, if only for a few days a year. And in doing so, they remember that beneath the marble, the logic, the oaths, they are still human, still wild, still a little drunk on life. By now, you've noticed the pattern. Dionysus doesn't appear where things are peaceful and orderly. He's drawn to the edges, to the overlooked, the exiled, the weirdos peeking through the cracks in polite society. And lately, you're seeing more of them. You're traveling now through dusty towns and coastal ports, following rumors of strange gatherings, bonfires where no firewood was lit, villages where the wine jars refill themselves, children born with ivy-shaped birthmarks. Every place has a new version of the same story. Dionysus was here. You arrive in one such place, small, poor, out of the way. Not the kind of place gods typically bother with. But Dionysus does. In fact, he seems to prefer it. He's sitting on a crate when you find him surrounded by the sort of people society routinely forgets. A blind fisherman who hums lullabies to the ocean, a girl with a stutter who speaks fluently, only in song, a foreign merchant who drinks too much and smiles too wide. You sit with them, no introductions, no need. The god tells a story, a simple one, about a vine growing through a crack in the stone. As he speaks, the listeners lean in. Not because of the story, but because of him. The way his words seem to bloom in the air. The way your doubts dissolve like sugar in warm wine. He finishes the tale with a soft chuckle and takes a long sip. Then he turns to the girl with a stutter and asks, "Your turn." And she sings. The town gathers. Slowly, cautiously. These aren't the drunk mobs you might expect from a god of revelry. These are the curious, the wounded, the almost brave. And Dionysus welcomes them all. You notice something strange as the night grows thick with music and laughter. No one is in charge. No one is policing the ritual. There are no priests here, no scrolls or hierarchies. Just participation, presence, permission to feel. Dionysus's power lies not in lightning bolts or laws, but in invitation. Historians still argue whether his cult was truly democratic or merely disguised chaos. But you've seen it firsthand, how someone silenced by life can speak in a Dionysian circle. How someone afraid to be seen can dance without shame. One man in the crowd stands out. Tall, tense face pinched with years of being almost respected. He watches the scene with skepticism, arms crossed so tightly they creak. You lean over to warn Dionysus. He smiles. Just wait. Hours pass. The music builds. A boy juggles figs while quoting Homer. A grandmother performs a burlesque routine involving a broom and a cheese wheel. People are crying and laughing at the same time, which feels disturbingly correct. And then the tense man begins to hum, quiet at first, barely audible, then a line, then a verse. And suddenly he's on his feet, reciting a poem he wrote 30 years ago, but never dared share. He stumbles through the meter flushes when someone claps, but doesn't stop. Dionysus closes his eyes, hands resting lightly on a wine jug. Another miracle, maybe. But not the flashy kind. Just a man rediscovering his own voice. A quirky tidbit you hear later, that man went on to start a school for orphaned poets. Half the town thought it would fail. It didn't. You keep moving with Dionysus, walking from village to village, always at twilight. He avoids the temples now. Too much marble, not enough moss. You meet a woman who once served in a temple of Apollo, orderly, brilliant, deeply lonely. She tells you she left after her dreams kept featuring a barefoot man in a leopard skin offering her wine. "I don't even like wine," she says. But she followed the vision anyway. Now she teaches children how to make masks, not just for theater for themselves, so they can be whoever they need to be until they're ready to take the mask off. One evening around a fire, Dionysus asks a quiet boy, "What do you want most?" The boy says, "To not be afraid." Dionysus nods, "Then dance." And the boy does, not well, mind you, but earnestly. And by the time the others join him, it's no longer about rhythm, it's about courage. You sit beside the fire, later, watching them all. People from every corner of life, mismatched and marvelous, united not by belief, but by release. And you realize that Dionysus is not the god of wine. Wine is just the door. He's the god of permission, of breaking out, of belonging exactly as you are, messy, flawed, brilliant. One fringe theory you once read scrawled on the wall of a ruined temple: Dionysus doesn't make people drunk. He reveals that they already were and just needed an excuse. You lie on your back staring at stars that feel unusually close. The fire crackles. Someone is trying to teach a goat to play the flute. It's going poorly. But you're content. You think of all the gods who demand order and obedience. And then there's Dionysus, who asks only that you show up as yourself, and maybe be ready to dance. It's just past dawn and your legs ache from too much dancing, or too much laughing, or both. You've lost track. You're curled in a blanket of pine needles beside a dying campfire. A rooster crows somewhere. It might be real, it might be someone pretending to be a rooster. With Dionysus, it's hard to say. Today's different, though. There's a quiet tension in the air, like the breath before a thunderclap. You follow Dionysus as he sets out, not toward another village, not toward another feast, but up a mountain path, steep and brambled, where the wind howls like it's got something to prove. The maenads are already there. Their eyes burn brighter than usual. Their steps are sharper, more deliberate. This is not a festival. It's something older, something deeper. You climb higher, the trees thinning the stones sharper underfoot. Then at the summit, you see it a circle of women, arms outstretched, thyrsus staffs, planted in the dirt, like boundary markers for a sacred storm. This is not the joyous frenzy of before. This is ritual. You step into the circle, and Dionysus appears not in disguise, not soft or barefoot. Tonight he is the god, crowned in ivy and gold eyes gleaming like polished wine-dark glass. His presence is overwhelming. It presses against your chest, not painfully, just undeniably. And then from the trees comes him Pentheus, the skeptical king, the neat-haired, marble-polished, scroll-reading ruler of Thebes. You know the type, all law, no laughter. Pentheus has heard the stories, the miracles, the madness. He doesn't believe them. More importantly, he doesn't want to believe them. You hide behind a tree as he marches up the mountain, demanding to see the maenads for himself, to expose their debauchery, to control what cannot be controlled. Dionysus smiles. Would you like to see them up close? Pentheus snorts. That's the idea. And then Dionysus disguises him. Not with smoke or thunder, but with suggestion. He convinces the king to wear a wig, to don women's robes, to spy without being seen. And incredibly, Pentheus agrees. Historians still argue whether Dionysus truly bewitched him or simply revealed a part of the king that was already curious, already craving what he condemned. Either way, the result is the same. You watch heart-pounding as Pentheus sneaks through the underbrush, clumsy in his stolen clothes, peering between branches at the wild women. At first he scoffs. Then he stares. Then he gasps. Something shifts in him. You see it. For a moment, Pentheus is lost in their movement, their freedom, their raw, terrifying joy. It frightens him, not because it's evil, but because it's beautiful. Then he makes the fatal mistake. He gets too close. The Maenads, deep in trance, in sacred mania, do not recognize him. They see only an intruder, a spy, a threat. And in their divine madness they respond the way nature responds to a virus. They remove it. You look away. Later they find his body in pieces, scattered like myth across the mountainside. His mother, Agave, is among the Maenads. She cradles his head still in trance, and only when the haze lifts does she realize what she's done. The horror spreads. Thebes is never the same. You sit beside Dionysus as the fire dies, the mountain behind you, shadowed and silent. He doesn't gloat, doesn't sigh, just sips from a cup and says he wanted to see. I let him. You shiver. This is not the soft Dionysus of wine and music. This is the god who reminds you that madness has a cost, that freedom, when denied too long, becomes wildfire. A quirky tidbit whispered among the Maenads that night. They say the mountain still speaks Pentheus's name when the wind is just right. You try listening. It might be true. And here on this cold mountaintop, you see the full shape of Dionysus. Not just joy and laughter, but also consequence. He is not just the god of parties. He is the god of what happens after the party ends. You descend the mountain changed, not afraid exactly, but humbled. You think about how society tries to box everything: joy, sorrow, gender, power. Dionysus doesn't break those boxes. He pours wine into them until they dissolve. And Pentheus, he clung too tightly to his control. And when control met chaos, chaos won. Not with cruelty, with inevitability. You walk through the forest as dawn breaks, vines coiling at your feet like gentle warnings. You wonder who you are when no one's watching, what you'd wear if no one cared, what mask you've worn too long. And you hear Dionysus's voice in your mind, soft as smoke. Would you like to see them up close? The trees, thin behind you, and city walls rise again on the horizon, stone stern and suspicious. You've arrived in a different kind of world, now one where streets follow a grid, scrolls are stacked with exacting care, and festivals are scheduled down to the hour. This isn't Greece anymore. You're in Rome. The air smells of olive oil and ambition. Columns stand in perfect rows like they've never even heard of Dionysus. Here he's known by a new name, Bacchus, and he's already been busy. You pass a crowd gathered at a public square, watching a procession that could only be described as barely legal. Dancers wear vine crowns, musicians blow flutes a little off-key, and in the center, pulled by leopards, yes, actual leopards, is a cart piled with grapes, half-naked actors, and laughter. It's a bacchanalia, one of many. These festivals began small, secretive. A handful of women mostly gathering at night beyond the city walls. No senators, no soldiers. Just music, wine, and whispered prayers. They carried ivy. They wore masks. They said they were following Bacchus, but they were also following each other to something freer, softer, less Roman. Rome didn't know what to do with them. At first, the authorities ignored it. A few women chanting in the dark, no threat. But then came rumors that men were joining, that slaves were speaking up, that citizens were laughing too much too loudly with too little clothing. And then Rome did what Rome always does when people start getting ideas. It panicked. You're in the Senate chamber one morning watching as a scroll is unrolled with a flourish. A trembling man with a too firm haircut reads a report, secret rituals, wild orgies, political conspiracies, perhaps even poisonings. No proof, of course, but enough whispers to make power nervous. Historians still argue whether the Bacchanalia were truly subversive or just misunderstood. The Senate decided not to wait for consensus. They outlaw the cult. All Bacchic gatherings are to be disbanded, ritual sites destroyed, priests arrested, worshippers questioned and in some cases executed. You walk through the aftermath, your stomach tight. Vats of wine smashed, clay masks cracked in half. A statue of Bacchus lies face down in the dirt, its vine-wrapped staff broken like a symbol of silence. But the vines don't stop growing. In alleyways and villas, in countryside inns and whispered tavern songs, Bacchus survives. His rites go deeper underground. His followers become more careful, more poetic, more symbolic. You attend one of these gatherings hidden behind an olive grove at dusk. The priestess speaks in riddles, the wine is passed quietly, and no one raises their voice. But the firelight dances just the same, and when the music begins, it's softer but somehow more defiant. The cult has changed, yes, but it hasn't died. You remember something Dionysus once said by a riverbank. The harder they squeeze, the more slips through. You believe it now. A quirky tale reaches your ears from the countryside in one village after Bacchic worship was banned. The locals simply changed the name of their wine festival to Festival of the Happy Goats. Same rites, same toasts, new branding. It worked. Back in Rome, even the poets can't let Bacchus go. Ovid, tipsy as ever, writes him into verses like a man possessed. There is no god more generous, he declares, nor more misunderstood. You walk the forum and catch glimpses ivy carved discreetly into marble borders, thyrsus staffs hidden in mural corners. The empire can't erase him. Not fully. He's too entwined with the human pulse. Bacchus becomes a symbol for the other, for those without a voice, women, foreigners, the enslaved, the queer. Those Rome can conquer but not completely define. You sit in a bathhouse one evening as two senators argue philosophy. One calls Bacchus a threat to order. The other shrugs, takes a sip of wine and says, or maybe just a reminder, we need some disorder now and then. You like that guy. Later, as the sky darkens and the baths empty, you see a small procession pass silently down a back alley. Candles flicker. A flute sighs. And there at the back, someone carries a statue of Bacchus, no taller than a loaf of bread wrapped in purple cloth. He's still here, smaller, quieter, but no less divine. Rome can build all the walls it wants. Bacchus finds the cracks. You lie awake that night in a borrowed room above a tavern listening to the distant echo of footsteps and laughter. And you realize Dionysus doesn't need temples. He lives in moments, in rebellion, in the permission to laugh when the world says be quiet. And in every city, every empire, there are always people who need that. The wine still flows, but now it does so behind closed doors. You're further from Greece now, deeper into Roman territory, where statues are heavier and gods wear more clothes. But Bacchus, your Dionysus in a borrowed toga, hasn't left. He's just gotten smarter. You're standing in a Roman villa, all mosaic floors and suspiciously polished busts. It's a senator's house, But tonight the marble speaks Bacchic truth. On the wall a fresco of dancers whirling with thyrsus staffs. In the courtyard ivy grows where it shouldn't. And in the private atrium a circle of cloaked figures lifting silver cups under flickering lamplight. These are no ordinary worshippers. These are elites, judges, landowners, even generals. They chant Bacchus's name not with wild cries, but with a reverent murmur like bankers whispering poetry. It's surreal, because despite the Senate's ban, despite Rome's obsession with order, the cult of Bacchus has crept back in. Not as a raucous public affair, but as something subversive encrypted in respectability. A woman at the gathering leans toward you. Her voice is calm, crisp rehearsed. You understand, of course, that this isn't worship. This is philosophy. You nod. Of course. One man recites lines from Euripides' The Bacchae, as if giving a legal argument. Another claims Bacchus represents the reconciled opposites, that chaos and order, madness and logic, joy and pain are all simply one in his name. Everyone hums approval and then downs their drink. You try to imagine explaining this to a Maenad. One quirky tidbit you hear whispered over a wine jug. There was once a Roman magistrate so terrified of Bacchus's influence that he refused to eat grapes, not drink wine, not even smell vinegar. His paranoia became a local joke. The Bacchus cult thanked him for the publicity. And while the state still claims the Bacchanalia are illegal, you start to notice something odd. Some of the harshest critics of Bacchus, they're also some of the most well-informed, as if they've done extensive personal research before condemning it. Classic. Historians still argue whether this revival was genuine worship or just fashionably rebellious hedonism. But here's what you see. The power of Dionysus doesn't fade with time. It adapts. It flows around rules like water around stone. And Rome is stone. You leave the villa just before dawn, head spinning from metaphors and too much sweet Falernian. In the street a man sings softly, off-key, maybe drunk. You follow his voice to a run-down amphora shop, where a group of laborers are gathered around a barrel, passing a shared cup and swapping stories. No silver goblets here, no toga-clad philosophy, just wine warmth and release. And you realize Dionysus belongs to them too. He always has. From palace to pigsty, his presence is the same, not in rituals, but in revelation. That to be human is to want to break free even just a little from the weight of daily performance. Back in the city center, you witness a parade for Jupiter Grand Orderly, full of gleaming armor and barely suppressed yawns. The crowd claps, but with the mechanical rhythm of tax payments. You glance at a nearby fountain and notice a child pouring water onto a vine growing in the cracks. He giggles when the leaves tremble. His mother scolds him. But you can see it in his eyes, the mischief, the spark. That's where Bacchus lives now. Later that night, you attend a more open festival, technically legal, technically dedicated to the harvest, but the undertones are impossible to miss. The dancers wear too much ivy. The music wanders too easily into ecstasy. And the wine everywhere. One masked reveler bumps into you and whispers, "They think we don't know what this is." Then he grins and vanishes into the crowd like a drunk ghost. Dionysus is no longer the loudest god, but he might be the deepest. He's in every slip of laughter behind a scroll, every stolen dance behind the curtain, every senator who drinks too much and dreams of running barefoot through wheat fields. You hear a story passed between two performers. One Roman nobleman kept a secret Bacchic shrine behind his wine cellar. His enemies exposed him in court. He was fined, but his parties grew twice as popular. You laugh. The more they try to suppress him, the more Dionysus becomes irresistible. Because he offers something no empire can regulate, a moment where you don't have to pretend. A breath where the world drops its rules and just is. Even now, as statues are built in marble and laws are etched in iron, you feel it, the tremor under the surface, the beat behind the order. Because no matter how many rules they write, vines still grow wild. The lamps are lit with oil now, not fire. The roads are straighter, the wine sweeter. But you can still smell him, Dionysus. No matter how many centuries pass, how many civilizations rise or fall, he remains. Beneath the stone-paved streets and temple domes, beneath law, beneath reason. And tonight you find yourself in a tavern at the edge of the empire, in a city too new for myths and too old to remember when it wasn't full of echoes. The barkeep calls him Bacchus. The girl sweeping calls him the vine god. The man in the corner, eyes glazed, voice like wet gravel, calls him the one who undoes you gently. You've started to recognize his fingerprints now, the signs of his presence, a laugh in the wrong place, a feast that goes on too long, a sculpture of a god whose smile doesn't match the official doctrine. You sit with a group of actors, poor, tired, drunk, but glorious. They wear the grease paint of failed tragedies, the sweat of comedy that barely landed. One of them leans close and asks, "Did you know Bacchus invented theater just to teach us how to lie honestly?" You raise a brow. He slaps the table. Think about it. The mask hides us, so we can show the truth. You sip your wine. It tastes like secrets. You don't argue. Rome is trying to tame Bacchus again. You've seen the edicts, the decrees, the respectable reinterpretations. He's been rebranded, repackaged. The Senate allows worship now, but only in daylight under supervision, with very clear boundaries. The Bacchic rites must be registered, approved, contained. But here's the thing, divine ecstasy doesn't file paperwork. So the rituals go elsewhere, into basements, into midnight fields, into theater troupes who claim they're only rehearsing. You're invited to one such gathering under the full moon, deep in the countryside, past the roads and beyond the reach of law. They don't call it Bacchanalia anymore. Too obvious. Now it's just a meeting, a poetry circle, sometimes goat night. You try not to ask, but when you get there, it's unmistakable. Ivy twines up the fence posts. A fire burns low in the center. People wear masks, some clay, some painted cloth, some just smudged faces turn to the night. And in the silence, someone begins to hum. Then it begins again, not with a bang, but with a breath, a shared movement, a rhythm older than language. The god has returned, not loudly, not with thunder or fanfare, but in a way that matters more. Because this time the revelers know what it costs. They know what the world thinks. They've seen what happens to people who laugh too loudly, cry too freely, love too messily. And still they sing. One woman dances alone, barefoot on sharp stones. She bleeds. She smiles. She says it's the first time she's felt anything real in months. One man recites a love poem to his dead brother. The others bow their heads, not in pity, but reverence. You don't know their names. They don't ask yours, because here names don't matter, only presence does. One fringe tale you overhear later, probably apocryphal but charming. There was once a senator who, struck by a Bacchic vision during a thunderstorm, stripped naked in the Forum, and gave a speech to a flock of geese. He was arrested, later promoted. Rome is complicated. Historians still debate whether the resurgence of Bacchus was resistance longing or just inevitable. But you've seen enough to know it's all three. The rites become more symbolic now. No more public madness, just subtle cues. A grapevine etched into a ring, a pine cone hidden in a painting, a phrase whispered that means nothing to most, but to a few opens everything. You visit a sculptor's studio. She works in silence, carving masks by candlelight. Each one unique, each one flawed. She tells you without looking up perfection is Apollo's lie. Bacchus wants what trembles. You stay quiet for a long time after that. Later that week you attend a small private performance. It's a tragedy, of course. The hero loses everything. The chorus mourns. The audience sobs. And then in the final moments, a burst of joy erupts, wild, inexplicable, cathartic. Someone throws flowers. Someone else throws up. You applaud with damp cheeks and a full heart. And afterward, in the flickering candlelight of the dressing room, the lead actor whispers, "Sometimes I think he's just watching from the wings, waiting to see if we remember how to lose control." You look to the shadows. You wonder. Because the truth is, Dionysus doesn't force his way into the world. He waits. He watches. And when the moment is right, when the performance breaks, when the laughter gets too real, when the silence before the scream stretches just 1 second too long arrives. Not always as a god. Sometimes as a song, a sip, a mask. You leave that night walking just a little taller, breath held just a little longer, wondering if maybe you've been part of the ritual all along. You're walking now not toward a shrine or a festival, but through an aging street market just before dawn. Bread stalls open slowly, lamps flicker reluctantly to life. Everything smells like wet stone and yesterday's olives. And yet, as always, you feel him. Dionysus Bacchus, whatever name he wears today, is in the air. Not loud, not wild, just present. You pass a vendor arranging clay masks on a blanket. One is smiling, one is weeping. You recognize them instantly, comedy and tragedy. Theater's two faces, his faces. You kneel beside the merchant. Why the masks? She shrugs. They help us say things we're not supposed to. You buy the weeping one. It feels light in your hands, like truth. Soon, you're in a small village tucked into a valley where rumors speak of performances that change people. You sit under an awning with a handful of others, farmers, traders, a tired nurse still wearing her apron. They don't speak. They just wait. Then the actors appear. They don't arrive with trumpets or banners. No painted wagons or grand introductions. Just 4 figures barefoot, masked, walking slowly into the circle. One holds a thyrsus staff wrapped in ribbons. Another carries a small jug of wine. They begin to act, but they don't perform for applause. They speak in low voices, move slowly, deliberately, as if time has bent to their rhythm. Their story is simple. A girl who longs to speak, but cannot. A world that mocks her silence. A god who gives her a mask and a voice. The play ends without resolution. The girl never speaks. Or maybe she always did. You're not sure. But no one claps. They just sit, breathing, weeping quietly. Someone passes a cup. You drink. And for a moment, the air shifts. A breeze kicks up. A leaf lands on your lap perfectly still. The actors bow and you swear you see the god in their midst. Just for a moment. Just a flicker. Then he's gone. Later, one of the actors tells you that the masks are made during full moons, that each one is destroyed after 7 uses. We don't keep the faces, she says, only the feelings. Historians still argue whether these traveling actors were part of any formal Bacchic tradition or simply inspired imitators. But you know the truth performance is ritual, and ritual, when born from the heart, becomes divine. You journey on. And again you see the pattern. A puppet show in a seedy tavern that ends in catharsis. A market fool who slips into poetry mid-joke and leaves his audience stunned. A painter who hides tiny maenads in the corners of respectable frescoes. Dionysus is everywhere. In disguise, the god of masks has become the mask. And you begin to wonder, how often have you seen him and not realized? One quirky legend you hear in a coastal fishing town, they say Bacchus once boarded a merchant ship to escape a storm. The sailors tried to rob him. By the time they realized he was a god, the mast had turned into a vine, and they were all bleating like goats. You ask the storyteller if it's true. He winks and says goats don't usually admit it. The deeper you go into the empire, the more Dionysus recedes from recognition, and the more he thrives in expression. His temples shrink, his festivals fade. But the performances, the poetry, the secret smiles exchanged between strangers who know, those grow. You arrive in a city plagued by drought and politics. The people are tired, thin. The forums are tense and the laughter feels rationed. But you follow a child through a side street to a warehouse where, behind baskets of spoiled figs and a curtain of moth-eaten wool, a show is happening. A woman on stage is pretending to be a goddess who's forgotten her own name. A man plays a donkey who recites laws backwards. The children howl with laughter. The adults try not to. You sit in the back mask in your lap and watch as something electric takes hold. The performers stumble, improvise, lose track, laugh, cry, sweat. And you know with full certainty that this is sacred, because this is what Dionysus wants: honest chaos. Not disorder, but unpredictability. The spark that happens when no one knows what comes next and decides that's okay. You think of his earliest rites. The wine-stained feet, the women in the woods, the pirates turned dolphins, the mountains echoing with drums. And you realize that this is the evolution, not an abandonment, a transformation. Dionysus didn't disappear. He decentralized. You think of something Silenus once muttered over a plate of burnt figs. The gods don't need worshippers. They need witnesses. You're starting to understand what he meant. You leave the warehouse that night with no wine on your breath, no ivy in your hair, just a quiet, swelling ache behind your ribs. The kind of ache that comes from remembering a part of yourself you forgot you missed. And for the first time in a long while, you don't want to understand the god. You just want to feel him. You're far from temples now. Far from cities, too. The road you're walking is made of dirt and ruts the kind farmers grumble about and sandals curse with every step. The only music is bird song, and even that sounds slightly annoyed. But you're not here for the scenery. You're here because someone told you there's a philosopher in this village who drinks too much and talks about gods in a way that makes even priests uncomfortable. You find him exactly where you expect, behind a crumbling tavern, legs dangling in a rain barrel, swatting flies with a scroll he clearly hasn't read. His name is Theomedes. He hasn't bathed recently, and he thinks this fact makes his thoughts more profound. And you know what? He's not entirely wrong. He pours you wine. No ceremony, just a chipped cup and a shrug. Then he asks, "Do you believe in Dionysus?" You nod. He snorts. "Good. Because I think he's the only god who ever believed in us back." You blink, and for the rest of the afternoon, he spins a wine-soaked web of ideas, all tangled up with half-remembered Plato anecdotes about satyrs, and a theory that wine is a metaphor for the soul, pressed, fermented, and poured into bodies that don't quite know what to do with it. You're not sure what to believe, but the wine helps. Historians still argue whether the philosophers of late antiquity saw Dionysus as metaphor or mystery. Some claimed he represented the loosening of the rational mind, a necessary undoing so truth could seep in through the cracks. Others thought he was the shadow side of reason itself, the part that whispers at the edge of logic. What if feeling is knowledge too? You ask Theomedes if he thinks the god is still around. He takes a long sip. Not in the way you expect. He doesn't knock. He leaks. You write that down. As evening sets in, a group of villagers joins you by the fire. They're not worshippers, not priests, just people. But they've brought instruments, pipes, lyres, a drum made from goat hide, and someone starts playing a tune you vaguely remember from a Dionysian rite years ago. It's slower now, softer, like the gods grown older or wiser or simply tired of shouting. And then through the music, someone recites lines from Euripides. In solemn awe, revere this mystery. Let no man born of mortal seed pretend the gods are not. A quiet falls. One woman hums. A child claps out of rhythm. Someone laughs, and then everyone does. And just like that, the moment breaks, but not before something stirs in the smoke. You see him again. Not clearly, not fully, but in the curve of a smile. In the flick of a wrist pouring wine without spilling a drop. In the way the night wraps around you like a chorus that never quite resolves. A quirky tidbit Theomedes shares later. There was once a symposium where all the scholars got so drunk arguing about whether Dionysus was real that they accidentally invented algebra. Or at least he slurs the part of algebra that doesn't make sense. You walk home from the village under a sky lit by more stars than questions. The air smells of figs and firewood, and the breeze feels like a sigh from something too old to name. You start to think about how many truths live just outside of reason. How much of the world doesn't fit into scrolls. How wine-like philosophy gets better when it's shared. Theomedes sends you off with one final thought. Maybe we made the gods in our image, but Dionysus made us in his. You don't argue. You're too busy watching the horizon twist slightly like a curtain about to lift. Because Dionysus, you realize, has outlived the temples, outlasted the laws. And now he's seeping into thought itself, into every poet's hesitation, every philosopher's pause, every question you're brave enough to ask after the second cup. He's not just a god anymore. He's an idea with rhythm. And once that rhythm gets into you, it never fully leaves. You're back in a city now, though you're not sure which one. It has too many names, too many faces. It smells like charcoal and spice and sounds like iron being hammered into cymbals. Empires have shifted, rulers have changed, but the pulse beneath the cobblestones, still familiar. You walk through crowded marketplaces, narrow alleys, cloisters, and quiet libraries, and you start to notice something. Dionysus is fading. Not gone, just faded. Statues are toppled or recarved to resemble new saints. His name disappears from scrolls. His rites, once whispered, are now forgotten altogether in some places. A boy in a bookstall asks if Bacchus was a type of fish. You don't laugh. You just nod. Because it's true. Time forgets gods that don't demand attention. And Dionysus, for all his chaos, never forces belief. He offers it like wine pour or pass your choice. You sit in a bathhouse listening to merchants argue over tariffs, and no one mentions divine ecstasy. In a nearby forum, a scholar gives a lecture on ethics and morality, carefully sidestepping anything that smells like joy. You feel the loss, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the slow dullness that settles over a world that no longer dances. You hear of temples turned into churches, of maenads turned into heretics, of wine blessed not for revelry but for restraint. Historians still debate whether Dionysus was destroyed by Christianity or simply absorbed into it, his wine rebranded, his rituals recast in Latin. The Eucharist is not so different from a shared cup at a midnight rite after all. But there's something about how clean it all is now, how controlled. You walk into a chapel and smell incense instead of grapes. Hear choral music where once there were flutes. No one is barefoot. No one laughs too loudly. No one weeps mid-hymn and calls it holy. The joy is measured here, approved. And Dionysus, he doesn't fit the mold. A quirky story you overhear from a monk polishing candlesticks. One of the older brothers secretly brews wine in the basement and swears that Bacchus once helped him during a particularly stubborn fermentation. Only once he mutters. He said I was too pious for regular visits. You think about knocking on that monk's door later. You don't. Because you've started to accept that Dionysus is slipping into myth now, into the realm of stories people tell after a second drink with a smile that says, "Don't quote me on this." You attend a small harvest festival outside the city, hoping for a spark. There are dancers, yes, music, food, and wine. But it feels choreographed, safe. You can almost hear the permits rustling behind every performance. And then you see her. An old woman sitting alone beneath a fig tree, sipping from a chipped cup, eyes closed, swaying ever so slightly to a rhythm no one else can hear. You approach. She offers you a drink without looking. "He's still around," she says before you ask. Just quieter now. You have to want to find him. You sip. It's sour, strong, alive. You sit together, saying nothing. The festival continues around you. A juggler drops a plate. Children laugh too loud. A boy gets scolded for dancing off beat. And yet in all of it, something glimmers. The thread, the pulse. Dionysus is no longer worshipped. Not openly, but he's remembered. In art, in theater, in sudden laughter at funerals, in the moment before a kiss when logic finally lets go. You walk back through the city with that knowledge folded in your chest like a letter you're not ready to open. You notice ivy climbing an abandoned wall, a broken mask tucked behind a statue, a poem scratched into the side of a fountain unfinished, but lovely. You start to believe that Dionysus no longer needs temples. He's moved into the in-between. He lives in the pause between performance and applause, in the breath you take before doing something terrifyingly honest, in every yes that bubbles up before your brain can say, wait. And maybe, just maybe, that's what immortality really is. Not being known, but being felt. You pass by a group of scholars arguing under a balcony. They're debating the nature of divine madness. You don't interrupt. You just smile and keep walking because you've met divine madness. You danced with it, drank with it, watched it tear down kings and lift up cowards and whisper to broken poets that they were already whole. And as the city lights fade behind you, you know this much is true. Dionysus didn't disappear. He stepped aside and left us to decide if we want to feel again. You wake beneath a sky streaked with the first pink hints of morning. The world is quiet, not the tense city square silence you remember from Thebes or Rome, but the kind that settles when something ancient has finished speaking. You sit up slowly, your back sore from too many nights on the ground. Your feet are dirty, your cup is empty, and you're smiling. Because you finally understand something. Dionysus was never just the god of wine or madness or even ecstasy. He was the god of permission. The god who said, feel everything, be everything, don't apologize for it. You look around and realize you're in the middle of nowhere again. A field maybe, a hill, somewhere that no one will name and no one will remember. But the birds are singing without asking for approval. The wind is skipping through the grass like it has somewhere better to be. And the god, he's here. You can't see him, not anymore. But you can feel him in the looseness of your shoulders, in the faint echo of drums that aren't playing, in the leftover warmth of a fire that never needed wood. You begin to walk. As you do, the memories start to pour through you like wine in reverse. You remember Semele turned to ash by curiosity. You remember the thigh-born boy raised in groves where nymphs whispered lullabies made of thunder. You remember pirates turned dolphins, women turned prophets, and kings turned cautionary tales. You remember dancing until your thoughts unraveled into stars. And through it all, Dionysus never once asked for blind obedience. He didn't demand temples or rules. He didn't write laws in stone. He simply showed up in the laughter, in the breakdowns, in the blushing moments that followed terrible poems or great kisses. Historians still argue whether his worship was religion rebellion or therapy with a better soundtrack. You don't care anymore, because now you know what he is. He's the courage to feel everything, the defiance to do it in public, the softness that remains after the mask is gone. You cross a small stream, the water cold and sharp on your ankles. On the other side, a young couple is picnicking. They're drinking wine from tin cups, biting into grapes, giggling at nothing. You don't interrupt, because this is the new right. Not orgies or masked parades, just presence, just joy unfiltered. Just two people choosing to feel deeply without permission. And isn't that enough? A quirky story floats into your memory, told by an old beggar in Athens. He said Dionysus once turned invisible for 100 years just to see who would miss him. And when he came back, he found no temples left, but so many gardens. You like that one. As the sun climbs, you sit on a flat rock and pour the last of your wine into the grass. For you whisper. And for all of us who danced when we should have sat still, you stay there a long time, and then, finally, you stand. Your feet are sore, your cup is empty, but your heart Your heart is full of song. The sky dims again, soft gray stretching into a gentle dusk. The light flattens into a glow that doesn't demand attention. You breathe deeper now, slower. Your body feels heavier in the best way. You hear nothing but wind brushing tall grass, the creak of a distant tree, and the soft patter of your own heartbeat easing into stillness. Dionysus is gone now, or maybe closer than ever. Either way, you don't need to follow anymore. You've carried the dance far enough. The masks are set down, the wine jars are empty, the drums have gone quiet, and still the echo lingers. You close your eyes and feel it in your fingertips, in the pulse of your own quiet aliveness. The reminder that joy does not need permission. That release is not shameful. That feeling, deeply feeling, is not a flaw, but a form of worship. So tonight, as you drift off, remember this: Dionysus lives in the spaces between. The moment before laughter, the breath before tears, the heartbeat before courage. You don't need a grove or a goblet or a god to reach him. You just need honesty and the willingness to let go. So rest now, soft and easy. Let your thoughts melt like wax. Let your shoulders fall. Let your breath find rhythm. You've danced enough for one night. The vines will still be here in the morning. Sleep well.